He sat in Seat 1A, wearing a faded hoodie and noise-cancelling headphones, looking like he belonged in economy. But the man in the bespoke suit standing over him wasn't just angry. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. "Get up, boy," the man spat. "The help sits in the back." What happened next didn't just silence the cabin, it grounded the entire flight. When the pilot finally walked out, he didn't arrest the boy in the hoodie. He saluted him. You are not going to believe who that passenger actually was, or the brutal karma that was waiting for the man in the suit the moment they touched down. The humidity of a late July afternoon clung to the tarmac at JFK International Airport, but inside the pristine, climate-controlled tube of Global Airways Flight 882 to London Heathrow, the air was crisp, smelling faintly of sanitized leather and expensive champagne. Tyrell Banks adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones over his ears, effectively muting the soft jazz piping through the cabin speakers. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the plush headrest of Seat 1A. To the casual observer, Tyrell looked like a graduate student who had perhaps splurged his entire savings on a lucky upgrade. He wore a charcoal grey hoodie that had seen better days, black joggers, and a pair of scuffed sneakers that were, unbeknownst to anyone else, a limited prototype from a company he had acquired 3 days ago. At 29, Tyrell was the founder and CEO of EtherLogic, a back-end infrastructure company that silently powered 60% of the world's banking transaction software. He didn't look like a billionaire. He didn't walk like a man who had the private cell phone numbers of presidents stored in his pocket. He just looked tired. He had spent the last 72 hours in a windowless room in Palo Alto, rewriting the encryption code for the very airline he was currently sitting on. Global Airways had suffered a massive data breach threat, and Tyrell's team had been the ghost squad called in to patch the hole before the public found out. He was flying to London to sign the final service contract, a piece of paper worth $400 million. All he wanted was to sleep. "Excuse me." The voice was nasal, loud, and dripped with an entitlement that cut right through Tyrell's active noise cancellation. Tyrell didn't open his eyes immediately. He hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the person was speaking to someone else. I said, "Excuse me." A heavy hand tapped Tyrell's shoulder. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was a shove disguised as a summons. Tyrell slid the headphones down to his neck and opened his eyes. Standing over him was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in corporate arrogance. He was in his late 50s, wearing a navy pinstripe suit that screamed Savile Row, with a silk pocket square flaring aggressively from his chest. His face was flushed, likely from the pre-flight scotch in the lounge, and his silver hair was gelled back into a helmet of authority. "Can I help you?" Tyrell asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the exhaustion dragging at his bones. "You're in my seat," the man said. He didn't check his boarding pass. He didn't look uncertain. He simply stated it as a fact of the universe. Tyrell glanced at the digital display on the suite wall. 1A. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his boarding pass, and checked it. 1A. "I don't think so," Tyrell said, offering a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Boarding pass says 1A. I think you might be across the aisle." The man scoffed, a wet, dismissive sound. He turned to the woman standing behind him. She was younger, dressed in designer brands from head to toe. Gucci belt, Louis Vuitton tote, Prada heels. She looked embarrassed, but not enough to intervene. "Meredith, look at this," the man said, gesturing at Tyrell as if he were a stain on the upholstery. "The airline's booking system is a shambles. They've double-booked the prime suite." He turned back to Tyrell. "Listen, son, I don't know how you managed to snag this seat, employee lottery, miles, whatever, but I paid full fare. $12,000. My name is Preston Holloway. Perhaps you've heard of Holloway Holdings. Tyrrell blinked. Holloway Holdings. The name was vaguely familiar. Mid-tier venture capital, real estate mostly. They were known for hostile takeovers of small manufacturing plants in the Midwest. Vultures mostly. I haven't, Tyrrell lied smoothly. But Mr. Holloway, I also paid for this seat. Now, if you don't mind, I have a meeting in London I need to rest for. Tyrrell went to pull his headphones back up. Preston Holloway's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his tie. He stepped into Tyrrell's personal space, looming over the seated man. "Don't you turn your back on me," Preston snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the other first-class passengers. A tech executive in 2B looked up from his iPad. An older socialite in 1K lowered her magazine. "I am a Diamond Medallion member with this airline. I have flown 2 million miles. I am not going to sit in 1B while some kid in a hoodie clogs up the flagship suite." 1B is identical to 1A, Tyrrell pointed out gently. "It's just across the aisle." "It's about the principle," Preston shouted. "It's about hierarchy. You do not belong in that seat." Tyrrell sighed. He looked at Preston, really looked at him. He saw the insecurity masked by volume. He saw the fear of being irrelevant. "Sir," Tyrrell said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "I suggest you take your seat before you embarrass yourself further." Preston's mouth fell open. He looked as if he had been slapped. He turned sharply toward the galley. "Attendant," he bellowed. "Attendant, we have a situation here." The heavy curtain separating the galley from the cabin was swept aside. The lead flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, marched into the aisle. Patricia had been flying for 20 years. She had a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a posture that suggested she had zero patience for nonsense. However, Patricia also had a radar for wealth. She took one look at Preston Holloway. The suit, the watch, a Patek Philippe, flashy, the demeanor. And then she looked at Tyrrell. She saw the hoodie. She saw the sneakers. She saw a young black man sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane, looking entirely too comfortable for her liking. "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Holloway?" Patricia asked, her voice dripping with professional honey. She evidently knew his name from the manifest, or perhaps he made a scene every time he flew. "This person," Preston said, pointing a manicured finger at Tyrrell, "is refusing to vacate my seat. I specifically requested 1A. My assistant confirmed it this morning." Patricia turned her gaze to Tyrrell. The honey in her voice evaporated, replaced by the sterile chill of an interrogation room. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Tyrrell didn't argue. He handed the slip of paper to her. Patricia scrutinized it. She held it up to the light. She typed something into the tablet she was holding. She frowned. "It says 1A, she admitted, sounding disappointed. "Exactly," Tyrrell said. "Can I go back to sleep now?" "Hold on," Preston interrupted. "Check the fare class. I bet it's a non-revenue ticket, a buddy pass, or a system glitch. I paid full cash. If it's a double booking, the paying customer takes priority. That is company policy." Patricia looked at Tyrrell. "Sir, are you an employee, or related to an employee?" "I am a paying customer," Tyrrell said firmly. "I paid the same fare he did. Actually, probably more, since I booked it 3 hours ago." Patricia narrowed her eyes. She didn't believe him. It was written all over her face. In her world, people who booked last-minute international first-class tickets didn't look like Tyrrell. They looked like Preston. "I need to see your ID," Patricia demanded. "And the credit card you used to book this." "Is that standard procedure?" Tyrrell asked, his eyebrows raising. Do you ask every passenger for their credit card after they've already boarded?" "I am asking you," Patricia snapped, "because there is clearly a discrepancy here. Mr. Halloway is a valued Diamond member. We need to resolve this." "The discrepancy is that he wants my seat," Tyrrell said. "That's not a logistical error. That's a tantrum." A gasp rippled through the cabin. Preston Halloway looked ready to explode. "Listen here, you little punk," Preston hissed. "I am flying to London to close a deal that is worth more than your entire life's earnings. I need the window on the left side because the sun glare on the right gives me a migraine. I am not asking you to move. I am telling you." "And I am telling you," Tyrrell said, sitting up straighter, his presence suddenly filling the small suite, "that if you don't get out of my face, you're going to regret it." Patricia stepped between them, but she faced Tyrrell. "Sir, calm down. You are becoming aggressive." Tyrrell laughed, a short, dry sound. "I'm aggressive? He's standing over me." "I'm going to ask you one last time," Patricia said, crossing her arms. "Move to seat 1B. It is the exact same seat. Let Mr. Halloway have 1A. It is a simple courtesy. If you cannot show courtesy, maybe you don't belong in this cabin." The implication hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Tyrrell looked at Patricia. He looked at her name tag. He memorized it. Patricia Evans. "No," Tyrrell said. "Excuse me?" Patricia blinked. "No," Tyrrell repeated. "I booked 1A. I'm sitting in 1A. I'm not moving to 1B. I'm not moving to economy. And I am certainly not moving because this man thinks his suit gives him the right to dictate where I sit." Preston threw his hands up. "This is unbelievable. I want the captain. Get the captain out here. I want this man removed." "Sir," Patricia said to Tyrrell, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "if I have to get the captain, we will be removing you from the flight for disturbing the peace and failing to comply with crew instructions. Is that what you want?" Tyrrell looked out the window. He could see the baggage handlers loading the final crates. He knew that in the belly of this plane there was a server rack being transported as special cargo, a server rack containing the proprietary hardware his company had designed. Without that hardware, Global Airways' logistics network would crash within 48 hours. He looked back at Patricia. "Go get the captain," Tyrrell said softly. "But I warn you, Patricia, once you open that cockpit door, you can't close it. You are making a choice right now. Are you sure you want to make it?" "Don't threaten me," she snapped. She turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. Preston Halloway smirked, adjusting his cuffs. "You're done, kid. You're done. You'll be lucky if you get on a Greyhound bus after this." Tyrrell didn't respond. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't start recording. He sent a single text message. To Jonathan Rothstein, CEO, Global Airways. Message: "Problem on flight 882. Seat 1A. Crew is trying to deplane me. You have 5 minutes." He hit send, placed the phone on the armrest, and waited. The silence in the first-class cabin was heavy, pressurized, and suffocating. It felt less like a luxury travel suite and more like a holding cell. The other passengers had stopped pretending to read their tablets. Every eye was fixed on seat 1A. Patricia Evans stood by the cockpit door, her arms crossed tight across her chest, guarding the entrance like a sentry. She refused to make eye contact with Tyrrell. Instead, she offered apologetic, tight-lipped smiles to Preston Halloway, who was now pacing the aisle, checking his Patek Philippe watch every 30 seconds. "This is absurd," Preston muttered, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "We are burning fuel. We are missing our slot, all because of one affirmative action hire who doesn't know his place." Tyrrell didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his phone resting on his knee. The screen was dark. He was counting the seconds. 1 minute, 45 seconds. Suddenly the cockpit door hissed and clicked open. The man who emerged was large, imposing, and carried the weight of 30 years of aviation authority. Captain Gary Miller was a man who didn't like delays. He had a square jaw, steel grey hair, and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets that caught the galley lights. He adjusted his cap, his eyes scanning the scene before locking on to Patricia. "What is the hold-up, Evans? Tower is giving us grief." Patricia straightened up, pointing an accusing finger at Tyrrell. "Captain, we have a passenger in 1A refusing to comply with crew instructions. There is a dispute over the seat. Mr. Halloway here," she gestured to Preston, who puffed out his chest, "is a Diamond Medallion member who booked this suite. The individual currently in the seat is refusing to move to 1B, is being aggressive, and has threatened me." Captain Miller's eyes narrowed. He turned his gaze to Preston. He saw the suit. He saw the status. He nodded once, a quick acknowledgement of social standing. Then he turned to Tyrrell. He saw the hoodie, the relaxed posture, the utter lack of deference. Captain Miller walked down the short aisle and stopped directly in front of Tyrrell. He loomed over him, using his height as a weapon. "Son," Captain Miller said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "I don't know how you got on this plane, and frankly, right now I don't care. But on my aircraft, the flight attendant's word is law. If she says you move, you move." Tyrrell looked up, his expression unreadable. "I have a valid ticket, Captain, and I have a contract to fulfill in London. I'm not moving." "This isn't a debate," Miller snapped, his patience snapping like a dry twig. "You are disrupting a federal flight. Do you know what that means? It means I can have the air marshals haul you off this jet, put you in cuffs, and ban you from flying on any carrier in the United States for the rest of your life. Is this seat worth that to you?" "He's clearly disturbed, Captain," Preston chimed in, stepping closer. "He's delusional. Just get him off so we can fly." "You heard the man," Miller said, his hand moving toward the radio clipped to his belt. "I'm calling security. You have 10 seconds to vacate the seat voluntarily." "Wait," Tyrrell said. "Too late," Miller growled. "Not for me," Tyrrell said softly. "For you." Tyrrell held up his phone. The screen lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the Global Airways internal network app, an app that passengers weren't supposed to have, an app that only senior executives and ops directors had access to. "What is that?" Miller frowned, squinting at the screen. "Captain," Tyrrell said, his voice steady. "Check your ACARS system. You have a message from the tower. Priority Alpha 1. Miller paused. He looked at Tyrrell, really looked at him, for the first time. He saw something in Tyrrell's eyes that didn't fit the narrative of an unruly passenger. He saw absolute, terrifying confidence. "How do you know about ACARS?" Miller asked, his voice wavering slightly. "Because I wrote the code for it," Tyrrell replied. At that exact moment, the flight deck door, which had been left slightly ajar, emitted a piercing, continuous chime. It wasn't the standard call attendant ding. It was the frantic, triple-tone alarm of a high-level operational override. The first officer stuck his head out of the cockpit, his face pale as a sheet. "Captain!" the first officer hissed, his voice cracking. "Captain, you need to get in here. Now! It's the CEO. He's on the direct line, and he is screaming." The color drained from Captain Miller's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. One moment he was the crimson-faced lord of the skies. The next, he was a ghost. "Rothstein," Miller whispered. "Jonathan Rothstein is on the comms." "He says to stop the boarding process," the first officer said, eyeing Tyrrell with a mixture of awe and fear. He says if the passenger in 1A has been touched, we are all fired. He used the word terminated 3 times, Gary." The cabin fell into a silence so profound you could hear the champagne fizzing in the pre-flight glasses. Patricia Evans dropped her tablet. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but she didn't bend to pick it up. Her mouth hung open, her eyes darting between Tyrrell and the captain. Preston Holloway, however, was too dense, or perhaps too arrogant, to read the room. "Who cares if the CEO is on the phone?" Preston scoffed, probably calling to apologize to me for this mess. "Captain, tell Rothstein I want this kid prosecuted." Captain Miller ignored Preston completely. He turned slowly back to Tyrrell. The arrogance was gone. The aggression was gone. In its place was the sheer, naked terror of a man realizing he had almost thrown his pension into a jet engine. "Sir," Captain Miller said. The word son was gone from his vocabulary. "Sir, who are you?" Tyrrell stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded his frame from the seat, standing at his full height. He adjusted his hoodie, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from the shoulder. "My name is Tyrrell Banks," he said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the first-class cabin. "I am the founder of Ether Logic. Your boss, Jonathan, hired me to fix your entire security grid because your firewall was built by amateurs. I've been awake for 3 days, saving this airline from a digital collapse." He turned his gaze to Patricia. She shrank back against the galley wall, trembling. "And I specifically booked this seat," Tyrrell continued, "because I need to sleep before I land in London, to sign the contract that keeps you all employed." Tyrrell looked at Preston. "And this man," Tyrrell pointed to the stunned businessman, "decided that I didn't look like I deserved to be here. And you," he looked at the captain, "agreed with him." Captain Miller swallowed hard. He looked at the phone in Tyrrell's hand, then at the cockpit where the CEO was waiting. "Mr. Banks," Miller stammered. I had no idea. The manifest just said, Banks. I didn't make the connection. I apologize, sincerely. This is a massive misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Tyrrell corrected him coldly. "It's a bias. You saw a hoodie and black skin, and you saw a problem. He saw a suit, and he saw a victim. Miller had no defense. He knew it was true. "Fix it," Tyrrell said, "or I walk off this plane. And if I walk off, the deal with Global Airways is dead. Jonathan knows that. That's why he's screaming." Captain Miller turned on his heel. He faced the cabin. He faced Preston. "Mr. Holloway," the captain barked. The authority was back, but now it was directed at the true antagonist. "Yes," Preston said, looking uncertain for the first time. "Finally. Get him out." "Sit down," Miller ordered. "Excuse me?" "Sit down in seat 1B, now, or get off my plane." Preston's face turned purple. "You can't talk to me like that. I am a diamond." "I don't care if you are the King of England," Miller shouted, his voice booming. "You have harassed a VIP passenger. You have delayed my flight, and you have insulted my crew's intelligence by trying to hijack a seat assignment. Sit in 1B, keep your mouth shut, and if you say one more word to Mr. Banks, I will have you arrested in London for interfering with a flight crew. Do you understand?" Preston Holloway looked around. He looked for support. He looked at Patricia, but she was busy staring at the floor, wishing she could dissolve into the carpet. He looked at the other passengers. The tech executive in 2B was smirking. The socialite in 1K was glaring at Preston with disgust. Preston had lost. He gritted his teeth, grabbed his jacket, and shoved past Tyrrell to get to seat 1B across the aisle. He slammed his body into the seat, buckling the belt with angry, jerky movements. Captain Miller turned back to Tyrrell. He took off his cap. Mr. Banks, Miller said, lowering his voice. I am going to make a public announcement. I am going to apologize to you in front of everyone. And when we land, I will personally escort you through customs. Please stay on the flight. Tyrrell looked at the captain. He saw the genuine regret, or at least the genuine fear of consequences, which was close enough. I'll stay, Tyrrell said, but Patricia doesn't serve me. I want someone else. Understood, Miller said instantly. She won't come near you. Miller went to the front of the cabin, picked up the interphone, and keyed the mic. His voice rang out through the entire plane, from first class to row 45 in economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. I want to apologize for the delay. We had a confusion regarding seat assignments caused by a failure of our staff to recognize a priority guest. I want to personally apologize to Mr. Tyrrell Banks in seat 1A. We are honored to have him flying with us today. He is a vital partner to Global Airways. We are pushing back now. Flight time to London is 6 hours and 30 minutes. The captain hung up. He looked at Tyrrell one last time, gave a sharp, respectful salute, and disappeared into the cockpit to calm down the CEO. Tyrrell put his headphones back on. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't have to. The silence from across the aisle was victory enough. The flight took off smoothly, banking over the Atlantic Ocean as the lights of New York City faded into the distance. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft, relaxing blue. For the first hour, Tyrrell slept. He slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. When he woke up, the smell of roasted chicken and truffle oil wafted through the cabin. He sat up and stretched. A new flight attendant, a young man named David, appeared almost instantly. Mr. Banks, David whispered reverently. Can I get you anything? Chef prepared the sea boss specially for you, or we have the steak. Water, please, Tyrrell said. And coffee. Black. Coming right up. As Tyrrell waited, he glanced across the aisle. Preston Holloway was awake. He was nursing a glass of scotch that looked like his third or fourth. He was staring at his laptop screen, typing furiously. He looked sweaty and agitated. When Preston noticed Tyrrell looking, he slammed his laptop shut. Enjoying yourself? Preston sneered. The alcohol had given him back some of his bravado. Tyrrell accepted the coffee from David and took a sip before answering. It's a comfortable seat, Preston. You were right about the legroom. Preston's eye twitched. You think you're special because you write computer code? You're a mechanic, a glorified digital janitor. People like me. We build the world. We move capital, real assets. Is that so? Tyrrell asked, turning his chair slightly to face Preston. Holloway Holdings. You buy distressed manufacturing plants in the Rust Belt, strip their pensions, sell off the machinery, and bankrupt the shell. You don't build anything. You're a demolition crew. Preston froze. How do you know that? I have Wi-Fi, Tyrrell said simply, and I was bored. You look me up? Preston laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Fan behavior. I looked you up because I wanted to know who I was sitting next to, Tyrrell said. And I found something interesting. You're flying to London to meet with the Kensington Group, aren't you? Preston went rigid. That's private information. That's insider knowledge. It's on your calendar, Tyrrell said, which is synced to your cloud, which is currently connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, which, as I mentioned, runs on security protocols I am currently rewriting. You really should use a VPN, Preston. Preston's face went white. You hacked me? I didn't hack you, Tyrrell said, his voice calm. You're broadcasting your data like a radio station. I just tuned in. You're trying to secure a £100 million loan from Kensington to cover the losses from that failed lithium mine in Nevada. If you don't get that loan by Monday, Holloway Holdings is insolvent." Preston gripped his armrest. His knuckles were white. "You can't prove that." "I don't have to," Tyrell said. "But the Kensington Group might be interested to know that the collateral you're offering them, the factory in Ohio, has 3 pending class-action lawsuits for groundwater contamination that you haven't disclosed." Preston choked on his breath. You wouldn't." "Why not?" Tyrell asked. "You tried to have me arrested. You tried to humiliate me. You judged me based on my hoodie and my skin. You wanted to ruin my day. Why shouldn't I ruin your career?" "Listen," Preston hissed, leaning across the aisle, desperation leaking from his pores. "Let's be reasonable. I was stressed. I had a bad day. I apologize, okay? I'm sorry. Don't do this. That deal is everything. If I lose Kensington, I lose the house in the Hamptons. I lose the boat. My wife, she'll leave me." Tyrell looked at Preston. He saw a small, sad man in an expensive suit. He saw a bully who crumbled the moment the power dynamic shifted. "I accept your apology," Tyrell said. Preston let out a long breath, slumping back. "Thank you. Thank you. I knew you were a reasonable man. Us businessmen, we have to stick together, right?" "However," Tyrell continued, tapping his finger on his laptop, "accepting your apology doesn't mean I'm going to let you defraud a bank." Preston sat up, eyes wide. "What?" "Business is business, Preston," Tyrell said, echoing the man's earlier sentiment. "It's about hierarchy, and right now, the truth is higher than you." Tyrell hit a key on his laptop. "What did you do?" Preston gasped. "What did you just do?" "I just sent an email," Tyrell said calmly, "to the chief risk officer at the Kensington Group. I happen to know her. We went to Stanford together. I just suggested she take a closer look at the Ohio EPA reports before signing anything on Monday." Preston stared at him. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The deal was dead. His company was dead. You destroyed me," Preston whispered. "No, Preston," Tyrell said, turning back to his window as the sun began to rise over the curvature of the earth, painting the clouds in gold and violet. "You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights." Tyrell closed his eyes. The rest of the flight was very, very quiet. The descent into London Heathrow was not gentle. The aircraft punched through layers of thick, slate-grey cumulus clouds, shaking the cabin with a violence that made the crystal glassware in first class chime together like warning bells. For the last 40 minutes of the flight, the atmosphere inside the nose of the plane had curdled into something toxic. The luxury of the suite, usually a sanctuary of soft leather and warm towels, now felt like a high-altitude interrogation room. Preston Holloway sat in seat 1B, his body rigid. He hadn't moved since the confrontation over the Atlantic. His Patek Philippe watch, usually his favorite object in the world, now felt heavy on his wrist, ticking away the seconds of a timeline that was rapidly collapsing. He stared at the flight map on the screen in front of him, watching the little white plane icon crawl agonizingly slowly over the Irish Sea. Inside his head, Preston was running simulations. He was a man who lived by the deal, by the spin, by the ability to talk reality into a shape that suited him. He rehearsed his opening line for the Kensington Group. "Gentlemen, apologies for the delay. A minor personnel issue on the flight. You know how the unions are these days." Yes, that would work. Blame the unions. Blame the airline. He just needed to get off this tube, find a signal, and control the narrative before the story grew legs. He glanced across the aisle. Tyrrell Banks was awake. He had been awake for the entire flight, fueled by black coffee and a terrifyingly calm focus. The young founder had his laptop open on the tray table, his fingers moving across the keyboard in a blur of practiced efficiency. He wasn't watching movies. He wasn't drinking champagne. He was rewriting the encryption keys for the aircraft's communication array, the very system that was currently guiding them through the soup of the London fog. Preston felt a surge of irrational hatred. Look at him, Preston thought. The hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the audacity. Even now, after everything, Preston couldn't reconcile the image of the man in seat 1A with the power that had been wielded against him. It felt like a glitch in the matrix, a computer error. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Captain Miller's voice came over the PA system. The authority in the captain's voice was different now. It was no longer the booming, customer service baritone of a commercial pilot. It was clipped, tired, and carried a weight that made the flight attendants in the galley exchange nervous glances. Patricia Evans, the lead attendant, was strapping herself into the jump seat near the cockpit door. She refused to look at row 1. She stared fixedly at the safety placard on the opposite wall, her hands gripping her knees, praying for the wheels to touch the ground so this nightmare could end. The floor tilted. The engines whined down, the roar shifting to a high-pitched scream as the flaps extended. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan and a heavy thud that reverberated through the floorboards. Preston gripped his armrests. Just land, he thought. Just open the doors so I can fix this. The wheels hit the runway hard. The plane bounced once, settled, and then the reverse thrusters roared to life, throwing everyone forward against their seatbelts. The braking was aggressive, shedding speed as they turned off the active runway and began the long taxi toward Terminal 3. Usually, the end of a flight was a moment of release. The tension of travel evaporated. But here, the tension only spiked. The silence in first class was deafening. The socialite in 1K put away her book. The tech executive in 2B closed his eyes. They were all waiting. They were the audience in a theater, waiting for the final act. The chime sounded. Ding! Signaling the aircraft had parked, and the seatbelt sign was off. The reaction was instantaneous. The Pavlovian instinct to stand up took over. Buckles clicked. Overhead bins popped open. Preston moved faster than anyone. He scrambled out of his seat, grabbing his leather briefcase from the floor. He needed to be the first one out. He needed to dominate the space. If he could just stride off with confidence, maybe the last 7 hours would fade away like a bad dream. He stepped into the aisle, smoothing his suit jacket, and turned toward the cockpit door. "Excuse me," Preston muttered, trying to project his usual command. "I have a tight connection. I need to get through." He expected Patricia to step aside. He expected the usual deference. Instead, the cockpit door hissed open, and Captain Gary Miller stepped out. He didn't look at the passengers. He didn't smile. He positioned himself directly in the center of the aisle, his gold epaulets catching the galley light, effectively blocking the exit. "Remain seated, please," Miller commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the cabin noise like a knife. Preston stopped inches from the captain's chest. "What is this? Open the door. I have a meeting." "Mr. Halloway, sit down," Miller said. He didn't use the polite sir. He used the name like an accusation. "Ground authorities have requested that no one deplanes until specific protocols are met." A ripple of murmurs went through the cabin. Authorities? Police? Preston's face went pale. "For him?" He jabbed a trembling finger back toward seat 1A. "You called the cops on him?" "Finally. It's about time you restored some order." Miller stared at Preston with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and disgust. He didn't answer. He looked over Preston's shoulder. "Mr. Banks," Miller said, and his tone underwent a complete transformation. The steel vanished, replaced by a profound, almost fearful respect. Global Airways Ground Ops is here. They have deployed the tarmac protocol for you. Tyrell Banks closed his laptop. The soft snap of the screen shutting was the loudest sound in the room. He stood up, stretching his back. He picked up his battered backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. "What is tarmac protocol?" Preston demanded, looking between the captain and Tyrell. "Why does he get to move?" "Look out the window, Preston," Tyrell said softly. Preston turned. He leaned over the empty seat of 1A and looked through the oval porthole. His breath caught in his throat. The jet bridge, the accordion-like tunnel that connected the plane to the terminal for the common passengers, had not moved. It sat idle, 10 feet away from the fuselage. Instead, on the tarmac below, a scene from a spy movie was unfolding. A convoy of 3 massive, matte black SUVs with tinted windows had driven directly onto the airfield. They were parked in a tight formation, right next to the plane's engines. Flanking them were 2 police motorcycles with blue lights flashing silently. A mobile stairway, the kind usually reserved for heads of state or visiting royalty, was being driven up to the right side of the aircraft, bypassing the terminal entirely. A strip of red carpet ran down the center of the metal stairs. That's not possible," Preston stammered. "You can't drive cars onto the runway. That's a security violation." "It is," Tyrell agreed, standing right behind him now. "Unless you own the encryption keys that the airport uses to verify security clearance, then it's just a pickup." The service door on the right side of the galley, the one opposite the main exit, swung open. The damp London air rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and rain. 2 men in dark suits bounded up the stairs and entered the cabin. They wore earpieces and carried themselves with the lethal efficiency of close protection officers. "Mr. Banks?" the lead agent asked. "That's me," Tyrell replied. "Sir, welcome to London. The secure uplink is ready in the vehicle. We need to get you to the data center immediately. Mr. Rothstein has cleared customs for you digitally." "Let's go," Tyrell said. He moved to walk past Preston. Preston stood rooted to the spot, his brain unable to process the geometry of the situation. The boy in the hoodie was leaving via motorcade. The man in the Savile Row suit was being told to sit down. "Wait," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. You're skipping the line." "I don't have time for lines, Preston," Tyrell said, stopping for a brief second. He looked Preston up and down, taking in the wrinkled suit and the sweat on his brow. "And I don't have time for people who think their net worth is determined by the seat number on their ticket." One of the security agents stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Preston's shoulder. It wasn't a violent shove, but the pressure was immense, an immovable object meeting a very fragile force. "Sir," the agent said, his voice low and dangerous. "Step aside. You are obstructing a Tier 1 VIP transfer." Preston Holloway stumbled back. He collapsed into seat 1B, his legs giving out. He watched, helpless, as Tyrell Banks walked out onto the red-carpeted stairs, descending into the waiting armada of black vehicles, leaving Preston alone in the sudden, suffocating silence of the cabin. The wheels of Global Airways Flight 1882 kissed the Heathrow tarmac with a violent shudder, the reverse thrusters roaring like a waking dragon. Outside the oval windows, the grey, weeping skies of London offered a grim welcome. But the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin was far stormier. For the last 4 hours of the flight, Preston Holloway had existed in a state of suspended animation. He hadn't touched his lukewarm scotch. He hadn't reclined his seat. He had simply stared at the fabric of the seat back in front of him, his mind racing through a maze of damage control strategies. He was a survivor, he told himself. He was a shark. He had talked his way out of SEC audits and labor strikes before. He just needed a signal. He just needed to hear the voice of the Kensington partners before they checked their inboxes. Across the aisle, Tyrell Banks was a study in contrast. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking at his defeated opponent. He was simply working. The soft clack, clack, clack of his keyboard had been a rhythmic torture for Preston, a reminder of the invisible machinery that was currently dismantling his life. "Cabin crew, disarm doors and cross-check." Captain Miller's voice crackled over the intercom. It sounded weary, stripped of the bravado he had worn in New York. As the massive aircraft taxied off the active runway, slowing as it approached Terminal 3, the seatbelt sign chimed off. The familiar chaotic shuffle of passengers began, buckles clicking, overhead bins snapping open, people rushing to stand up after 7 hours of confinement. Preston moved with the desperation of a drowning man. He unbuckled his belt, his hands trembling violently, and grabbed his leather briefcase. He needed to be the first one off. Every second wasted was $1 million lost. He stepped into the aisle, thrusting his chest out, ready to shoulder his way past the calm figure of Tyrell Banks. "Excuse me," Preston muttered, his voice hoarse. "I have to get through." "Remain seated, Mr. Halloway." The command didn't come from a flight attendant. It came from the front of the cabin. Captain Miller had emerged from the cockpit, physically blocking the exit door with his broad shoulders. He stood like a bouncer at a club, his expression unyielding. "Captain, move aside," Preston snapped, sweat beading on his upper lip. "I have a meeting that determines the fate of £100 million asset. I'm getting off this plane." "No one is deplaning yet," Miller said, his voice flat and hard. "Ground authorities have requested a hold on all passenger movement until specific protocols are met." Preston's stomach dropped. "Authorities?" His eyes darted to Tyrell, who was calmly sliding his laptop into a battered backpack. "You called the police? For a seat dispute? This is harassment. I'll sue this airline into the ground." Miller didn't even look at Preston. He looked past him, focusing entirely on Tyrell. "Mr. Banks," Miller said, his tone shifting instantly from steel to silk. "Global Airways ground operations has arrived. They have deployed the tarmac protocol for you." The cabin fell silent. Even the socialite in 1K stopped rummaging through her purse. Tarmac protocol. It sounded expensive. It sounded exclusive. Tyrell zipped his bag and stood up. He adjusted his hoodie, looking exactly as he had when he boarded, unassuming, tired, and utterly unconcerned with the trappings of wealth. "Thank you, Captain," Tyrell said quietly. "What is tarmac protocol?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking. "Why does he get to go first?" Preston got his answer a second later. The main cabin door, connected to the jet bridge, remained shut. Instead, a heavy mechanical whirring sound came from the right side of the aircraft. The service door, usually reserved for catering trucks, swung open, letting in a gust of cool, damp English air. Preston peered through the window and felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a catering truck. A mobile stairway, draped in a red carpet, had been driven up to the side of the plane. Waiting at the bottom was a convoy of 3 matte black SUVs with tinted windows, their engines idling. Flanking the vehicles were 2 motorcycle outriders and several men in dark suits who were distinctly not airline staff. 2 of the suits bounded up the stairs and entered the cabin. They wore earpieces and moved with the precise, lethal efficiency of private security contractors. "Mr. Banks?" the lead agent asked, scanning the room. "That's me," Tyrell said. "Welcome to London, sir. Mr. Rothstein sends his personal regards. We have the secure line open to the data center. Customs has been pre-cleared. We need to move immediately." Tyrell nodded. He swung his backpack over one shoulder and stepped into the aisle. Preston stood rooted to the spot, blocking the path. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the image of the hoodie kid with the head of state treatment unfolding before him. "Move, Preston," Tyrrell said. His voice wasn't angry. It was just, "Done." You're not going through the terminal," Preston whispered, the fight draining out of him. "No," Tyrrell replied, his eyes meeting Preston's for the last time. "I don't have time for lines. And I don't have time for people who think their net worth is determined by the cut of their suit." One of the security agents stepped forward. He didn't shove Preston, but he placed a hand on his shoulder that carried the weight of an anchor. "Sir," the agent said, his voice low and dangerous, "step aside. You are obstructing a Tier 1 VIP transfer." Preston stumbled back, collapsing into his seat. He watched, mouth agape, as Tyrrell Banks walked past him. At the open door, Tyrrell paused. He turned back, his gaze finding Patricia Evans. The flight attendant was huddled in the galley corner, clutching a coffee pot like a shield, her face pale as a sheet. She looked terrified that this was the moment she would lose her pension. "Patricia," Tyrrell called out. She flinched. Yes, Mr. Banks?" Tyrrell offered a faint, tired smile. "The service was terrible. You judged me the moment I walked on." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the axe to fall. "But," Tyrrell continued, "the coffee was okay. Tell Jonathan I said you need retraining on unconscious bias, not firing. Everyone deserves a second chance to learn respect. Don't waste yours." Patricia opened her eyes, tears spilling onto her cheeks. She nodded frantically, unable to speak. Tyrrell then turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Preston's reflection in the cockpit glass. "Preston," Tyrrell said, "check your phone." And then he was gone. The security agents followed. The heavy door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. The spell broke the moment the regular jet bridge connected to the left side of the plane with a dull thud. Captain Miller stepped aside, looking like he had aged 10 years in the last 7 hours. "The rest of you may deplane now," Miller muttered, retreating into the sanctuary of the cockpit. Preston Holloway scrambled out of his seat. He didn't care about dignity anymore. He didn't care about the other passengers staring at him with a mix of pity and disgust. He sprinted down the jet bridge, his dress shoes slipping on the metal joining plates, pushing past the tech executive who was chuckling softly. He burst into the arrivals hall of Terminal 3, his chest heaving. He frantically disabled airplane mode. Buzz, 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 buzz. His phone exploded with activity. It vibrated so violently in his hand, it felt like it was burning his skin. The notifications cascaded down the screen in a blur of terrifying white boxes. 14 missed calls, Kensington Partners. 27 new emails. Alert, stock price, Holloway Holdings, 42%. Preston stopped dead in the middle of the moving walkway. Behind him, weary travelers grumbled and navigated around his frozen form. But he was alone in his own personal hell. His thumb hovered over a voicemail from 10 minutes ago. From Victoria Vance, head of legal, Kensington Group. He pressed play, holding the phone to his ear with a shaking hand. "Mr. Holloway, this is Victoria Vance. We received a disturbing, highly detailed dossier this morning regarding the unreported Ohio EPA violations and your current liquidity crisis. We have also been informed of your conduct aboard Flight 8822 towards a key strategic partner of our firm's tech division. The Kensington Group does not do business with liabilities. The financing offer is rescinded, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are filing a formal complaint with the SEC regarding the falsified asset reports you submitted last week. Do not come to our offices. Security has been instructed to deny you entry." The phone slipped from Preston's sweat-slicked fingers. It hit the hard linoleum floor with a sickening crack, the screen spiderwebbing down the middle. "No," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the terminal announcements. No, I can fix this." Mr. Holloway. Preston looked up, blinking through the haze of his panic. Standing at the end of the walkway were 3 men. 2 were uniformed police officers, British bobbies, standing with their hands on their vests. The third was a man in a sharp, slate-grey suit, holding a thick manila envelope. "I am Mr. Holloway," Preston said, his voice trembling. He straightened his tie instinctively, a reflex that now seemed pathetic. Do you represent Kensington?" "I can explain everything. It's a misunderstanding. A competitor is spreading lies." The man in the grey suit stepped forward. His expression was bored, bureaucratic, and utterly merciless. "I am Arthur Doyle, representing Global Airways Legal Department," the man said, shoving the envelope into Preston's chest. "What is this?" "You are being served with a lifetime ban from Global Airways and all SkyTeam partner carriers," Arthur recited efficiently. "Your return ticket has been cancelled without refund. Additionally, we are filing a civil suit for the disruption of operations today. You delayed a transatlantic flight by 40 minutes. We calculate the fuel, missed slot fees and staffing costs to be approximately £45,000. I can't pay that," Preston stammered, looking at the cracked phone on the floor. "My financing just fell through." "That is hardly our concern," Arthur said, stepping back. "However, these officers have a more pressing matter." One of the police officers stepped forward, looming over Preston. "Mr. Preston Holloway, we have a warrant for your provisional detention." "Detention?" Preston shrieked. "For what? Being rude on a plane?" "No, sir," the officer said calmly. "Regarding an outstanding extradition request from the United States, State of Nevada, charges of environmental fraud and falsification of public records. It seems your exact location was pinged to the authorities about an hour ago by a concerned third party who had access to your digital calendar." Preston's knees gave out. He didn't stumble. He collapsed. He sank to the dirty terminal floor, his expensive suit gathering dust. The crowd of travelers parted around him like a river flowing around a submerged stone. No one stopping to help. From his vantage point on the floor, through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Terminal 3, Preston could see the tarmac. In the distance, the black SUV convoy was speeding away toward the perimeter gate, lights flashing, flanked by police escorts. It moved with purpose, power, and unstoppable momentum. Terrell Banks was gone. He was off to save the airline, sign a $400 million contract, and reshape the digital world. Preston Holloway was sitting on the floor, bankrupt, banned, and under arrest. He looked at his reflection in the terminal glass. The bespoke suit was wrinkled. The silk pocket square was limp. The Patek Philippe watch ticked loudly on his wrist, each second echoing like a gavel striking a sounding block. He realized, far too late, that Terrell had been right all along. Hierarchy wasn't about who sat in seat 1A. It wasn't about the suit, or the watch, or the loud voice. It was about the code. The world ran on invisible lines of logic, and Preston Holloway had just been deleted. Preston Holloway thought his suit made him a king, but he forgot the most important rule of the modern world. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book wrote the code that runs your life. Terrell Banks didn't just win the seat, he bought the whole game. This story is a brutal reminder that respect is the only currency that matters. You never know who you are talking to. That quiet kid in the hoodie might just be the one holding the keys to your future. If you believe that karma always collects its debt, hit that like button right now. And if you want more stories where the arrogant get exactly what they deserve, subscribe and turn on notifications. Comment karma down below if you think Preston got off too easy. Thanks for watching. and I'll see you in the next one.